He thought he was paying a debt with his daughter, but the mafia boss had already made a decision nobody in that room understood. Ava Carter stood silently in the corner of the small office, her hands clenched tightly together as voices rose around her. The air smelled of old wood, stale coffee, and desperation. Across the room, her father, Ethan Carter, looked like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights, and his hands trembled as he stared at the powerful man seated behind the desk. Vincent Romano said nothing. The white mafia boss sat perfectly still, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that looked more expensive than everything Ethan owned combined. His expression revealed nothing. That silence frightened people more than anger ever could. Ethan swallowed hard and lowered his head. "I have no money," he said, his voice breaking. The words seemed to echo through the room. Ava felt her stomach twist. She already knew this meeting was bad. She just did not know how bad. For months, her father had been drowning in debt after a business partner disappeared with money that was never recovered. Every attempt to save the family had failed. Every promise had collapsed. Now they were here. Ethan looked defeated. Completely defeated. Vincent slowly leaned back in his chair. His cold blue eyes moved across the room until they landed on Ava. The young black woman felt her heart stop. For a long moment he simply watched her. Then he spoke. "She will serve as payment." The room went silent. Ava could barely breathe. Ethan looked up so quickly that his chair nearly tipped backward. "No," he whispered. "Please." Fear spread through Ava's chest like ice water. She had heard stories about men like Vincent Romano. Stories people whispered when they thought nobody important was listening. Wealth. Power. Influence. Nobody said no to him. Nobody challenged him. Ethan stepped forward. "Take the house. Take my truck. Take anything else." Vincent's expression never changed. "Those things are worthless to me." Ava felt her father's panic growing. "Please," Ethan repeated. "She has done nothing wrong." Vincent remained silent. The stillness in the room became unbearable. Finally he stood. At over 6 feet tall, he seemed even more intimidating. He walked toward Ava, stopping several feet away. She forced herself not to look down. "What is your name?" he asked. "Ava," she answered quietly. Vincent studied her face for several seconds. Not with cruelty. Not with amusement. Almost as if he were searching for something. Then he nodded once. "Pack a suitcase." Ava stared at him. "What?" "One suitcase," Vincent said calmly. "You leave tonight." Ethan looked devastated. Ava felt her entire world collapsing around her. Yet something about Vincent's eyes confused her. She expected satisfaction. She expected ownership. Instead, she saw something else. Something impossible to understand. As Vincent turned toward the door, his head of security stepped beside him and asked quietly, "Are you sure?" Vincent's answer came without hesitation. More sure than ever. And as Ava watched the most feared man in Chicago walk away, she had no idea that the debt destroying her family was only the beginning of a much larger secret. Ava barely remembered the drive. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows of the black sedan as fear and uncertainty battled inside her mind. Every terrible possibility seemed to repeat itself over and over. Beside her sat one of Vincent Romano's security men, but he never spoke. He never looked at her. The silence only made everything worse. She clutched the handle of her small suitcase so tightly that her fingers hurt. 3 hours earlier she had been standing in her father's kitchen. Now she was being transported to the estate of one of the most powerful men in Chicago. Nothing about the situation felt real. Eventually the car turned through a set of enormous wrought iron gates. Ava looked up and felt her breath catch. The Romano estate stretched across acres of perfectly maintained land. Elegant stone buildings stood beneath soft exterior lighting. Fountains sparkled in the distance. Gardens lined winding pathways. It looked less like the home of a feared mafia boss and more like something from an old movie. The vehicle stopped in front of the main residence. A woman in her 60s immediately stepped forward to greet them. "Welcome, Miss Carter," she said warmly. Ava blinked in surprise. "Welcome?" The woman smiled gently. "My name is Margaret. Mr. Romano asked me to show you your room." Ava frowned. Room. Not basement. Not servant quarters. Not prison. Room. Confusion slowly joined her fear. She followed Margaret through the mansion. Marble floors reflected the warm glow of crystal chandeliers. Large paintings covered the walls. Everything felt expensive, yet strangely quiet. No loud parties. No intimidating strangers. No signs of danger. Margaret opened a door on the second floor. Ava stepped inside and froze. The room was beautiful. Large windows overlooked the gardens. Fresh flowers sat on a table near the bed. A bookshelf filled one wall. A private bathroom connected to the suite. It looked larger than the apartment where she had grown up. "There must be some mistake," Ava whispered. Margaret looked puzzled. "No mistake." Ava turned slowly. "Why am I here?" For the first time, Margaret seemed uncertain. "Mr. Romano said he would explain when the time was right." That answer provided no comfort. Later that evening, Ava sat alone beside the window staring across the estate grounds. She could not stop thinking about her father. Had he eaten dinner? Was he safe? Did he blame himself? The thought broke her heart. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Margaret entered carrying a tray of food. "You should eat." Ava looked down at the meal. Fresh vegetables. Chicken. Warm bread. Real food. Not the treatment of a hostage. "Why is everyone being nice to me?" she asked quietly. Margaret paused. Then she offered an answer that only deepened the mystery. "Because Mr. Romano gave very specific instructions." Before Ava could ask another question, Margaret left. Hours later, unable to sleep, Ava walked quietly into the hallway. As she passed an office on the first floor, she noticed light beneath the door. Curious, she glanced through a narrow opening. Vincent Romano stood alone inside. Spread across his desk were photographs. Documents. Reports. His attention was focused on a single file. Ava's file. Her heart began pounding. Then she noticed something even stranger. Attached to the folder was a photograph of her taken nearly 6 months ago. Vincent had known who she was long before the debt meeting ever happened. Ava did not sleep that night. Long after the mansion had gone quiet, she remained awake replaying everything she had seen through the office door. The photograph. The file. The unmistakable proof that Vincent Romano had known about her long before her father ever stepped into that debt meeting. Every answer seemed to create 3 new questions. When morning finally arrived, she dressed and cautiously stepped into the hallway. A house employee immediately greeted her and informed her that breakfast was waiting downstairs. The kindness unsettled her almost as much as the mystery itself. Nothing about this place matched the stories she had heard. After breakfast, Margaret appeared carrying a small brass key attached to a faded green ribbon. "Mr. Romano would like to see you," she said. Ava followed her through several hallways until they reached Vincent's office. He stood beside a large window overlooking the estate grounds. Without turning around, he held out the key. "There is a greenhouse on the east side of the property," he said. Ava looked at the key but did not take it. "Why am I here?" Vincent finally turned toward her. "Because I need your help." Ava almost laughed. You could have asked. A faint expression crossed his face. Not quite a smile. Not quite regret. People rarely say yes when they are afraid of me. The honesty caught her off guard. Vincent placed the key on the desk. The greenhouse has been closed for 6 years. Ava frowned. Why? For the first time, emotion appeared in his eyes. It vanished almost immediately, but she saw it. Because nobody has been allowed inside. Ava slowly picked up the key. And now? Now you are. The answer made no sense. Yet before she could ask another question, Vincent walked toward the door. Come with me. 10 minutes later they crossed a stone pathway lined with flowering trees. At the far end of the property stood an enormous glass structure partially hidden by vines and overgrown hedges. Sunlight reflected across hundreds of dusty panels. Despite years of neglect, the building still possessed a strange beauty. Vincent stopped several feet away. Open it. Ava stared at him. You have the key. The key belongs to you now. Confused, she stepped forward and unlocked the weathered door. The hinges groaned softly as it opened. Warm air drifted out carrying the scent of soil, leaves, and forgotten memories. Ava stepped inside. Rows of plants stretched throughout the enormous space. Some had survived despite years of neglect. Others had withered long ago. Dust covered old gardening tools. Sunlight filtered through the glass ceiling in golden beams. The entire place felt frozen in time. Ava slowly turned in a circle. Why would you trust me with this? Vincent remained near the entrance. His gaze moved across the greenhouse as though visiting a place he had not truly left behind. Because my mother loved this garden. The answer landed heavily between them. Ava suddenly understood why nobody else had been allowed inside. This was not a greenhouse. It was a memorial. A sanctuary. A place connected to grief. Vincent looked toward a faded wooden bench near the center of the room. She spent hours here every day. His voice was quieter now. After she died, nobody touched anything. Ava looked at the dying plants surrounding them. Then she looked back at Vincent. For the first time since arriving at the estate, she saw something beyond the power, wealth, and reputation. She saw loneliness. And standing inside that forgotten garden, Ava realized the most feared man in Chicago might be carrying wounds of his own. Over the next several days, the greenhouse became Ava's refuge. Each morning she arrived shortly after sunrise carrying gardening gloves, pruning shears, and a notebook filled with observations. What had first looked like a collection of dying plants slowly revealed signs of life. Beneath layers of neglect, many of them were still fighting to survive. Ava understood that feeling better than most people. She spent hours trimming dead branches, clearing pathways, and watering roots that had been ignored for years. The work was exhausting, but it brought a sense of peace she had not felt since before her family's troubles began. Vincent rarely entered the greenhouse. Instead, he observed from a distance. Sometimes Ava would glance through the glass and spot him standing near the pathway, watching silently before disappearing again. He never interfered. He never offered instructions. Yet somehow she always found fresh supplies waiting when she needed them. New gardening tools appeared. Damaged irrigation lines were repaired. Bags of soil arrived without explanation. It was as though an invisible hand was quietly helping her succeed. One afternoon, while cleaning a neglected corner of the greenhouse, Ava discovered an old wooden cabinet hidden behind overgrown vines. Inside were gardening journals carefully organized by year. Curious, she opened one. The handwriting belonged to Vincent's mother. Page after page contained notes about flowers, planting schedules, and reflections about life. Some entries discussed loss. Others celebrated small moments of happiness. Ava found herself smiling as she read. Then a photograph slipped from between the pages. She picked it up carefully. A woman stood in the center of a blooming garden, laughing beneath the summer sun. Her smile radiated warmth. Even more surprising, she looked nothing like the intimidating world associated with the Romano name. She looked kind. Genuine. Human. Ava studied the photograph for several moments before noticing writing on the back. It read, "Never measure people by what they own. Measure them by what they give away." The words stayed with her throughout the day. Later that evening, Vincent unexpectedly entered the greenhouse. Ava looked up from her work and noticed his gaze immediately settle on the photograph in her hands. For a brief moment, something softened in his expression. "That was her favorite picture," he said quietly. Ava looked down at the image. "She seemed wonderful." Vincent nodded. "She was." Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable silence. Thoughtful silence. Ava carefully returned the photograph to the journal. "You miss her." Vincent stared toward the glass ceiling above them. Golden evening light filled the greenhouse. Every day. The honesty surprised her. Powerful men rarely admitted pain. Yet there was no hesitation in his answer. Ava hesitated before asking the question that had been growing in her mind for days. "Why did you choose me?" Vincent's expression immediately became unreadable again. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he looked directly at her. "Because some people deserve a chance before the world decides who they are." The answer only deepened the mystery. Before Ava could ask more, Vincent turned toward the exit. But as he reached the doorway, he paused. "Tomorrow," he said without looking back, "someone will arrive from New York." Ava frowned. "Who?" Vincent's jaw tightened slightly. "The man who helped create your father's debt." The greenhouse suddenly felt colder. And for the first time since arriving at the estate, Ava realized her family's nightmare was far from over. The next morning, tension settled across the Romano estate like a storm cloud waiting to break. Ava sensed it immediately. Employees spoke more quietly. Security personnel appeared in greater numbers along the property. Even Margaret seemed distracted. Nobody explained what was happening, but everyone knew an important visitor was coming. Ava spent the early hours inside the greenhouse trying to focus on her work. Fresh green shoots had begun appearing among several neglected flower beds. Small signs of life emerged where decay once dominated. Normally the sight would have brought her comfort. Today it only reminded her of Vincent's warning. The man responsible for her father's debt was coming. Around noon, a convoy of luxury vehicles rolled through the front gates. Ava happened to be near a greenhouse window when she saw them arrive. Several black cars stopped in front of the mansion. Moments later, a tall man in an expensive navy suit stepped out. He carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. His silver hair was perfectly styled. His smile looked polished and professional. Yet something about him immediately made Ava uneasy. This was not the face of a desperate criminal hiding in shadows. This was the face of a respected businessman. That realization frightened her even more. Later that afternoon, Ava entered the mansion to retrieve gardening supplies and accidentally overheard voices coming from a nearby conference room. The door was partially open. She recognized Vincent's voice immediately. Calm. Controlled. The second voice belonged to the visitor. "You have something that belongs to me," the man said. Ava froze. "I believe you are mistaken," Vincent replied. "The Carter family owes obligations that have not been fulfilled." Ava's pulse quickened. The conversation was about her father. About her. She remained hidden just beyond the doorway. "The debt was manufactured," Vincent said evenly. "You know that." Several seconds passed. Then the visitor laughed softly. "Business is business." The words sent a chill through Ava. Not because they sounded threatening. Because they sounded indifferent. As though people's lives were simply numbers on a spreadsheet. Vincent remained silent for a moment. Ethan Carter signed documents based on false information. He signed them anyway. Another pause followed. Ava could not see Vincent from her position, but she imagined the cold look in his eyes. You targeted a desperate man. I identified an opportunity. The answer made her stomach turn. Suddenly a floorboard creaked beneath her foot. The conversation inside stopped instantly. Ava's heart nearly stopped. A second later the door opened completely. Vincent stood there. Their eyes met. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Vincent stepped into the hallway and quietly closed the door behind him. You should not be standing here, he said. Ava swallowed nervously. Is it true? Vincent studied her expression. Is what true? My father was set up. The question lingered between them. Finally Vincent nodded once. Yes. Ava felt as though the ground shifted beneath her feet. For months she had blamed her father for making bad decisions. Now she discovered someone had deliberately manipulated him. Vincent looked toward the closed conference room door. That man did not come here for money. Ava frowned. Then why is he here? Vincent's jaw tightened slightly. His answer came quietly. Because the moment I brought you here, his plan began falling apart. That night, Ava sat alone inside the greenhouse long after the sun had disappeared. The conversation she had overheard continued echoing through her mind. Her father had not simply made a series of bad decisions. Someone had deliberately built a trap around him. The realization changed everything. For the first time since arriving at the Romano estate, she stopped seeing herself as a payment and started seeing herself as part of a larger plan she did not yet understand. Around midnight, she noticed light coming from the mansion library. Curious, she stepped inside and found Vincent standing beside a large table covered with documents. He did not seem surprised to see her. You should be sleeping, he said. Ava folded her arms. You should be answering questions. To her surprise, a faint smile appeared. Fair enough. Vincent motioned toward the documents. Come here. Ava approached cautiously. Spread across the table were financial records, contracts, bank transfers, and investigative reports. She immediately recognized her father's name appearing repeatedly throughout the files. Vincent pointed to a series of transactions. 3 years ago, Ethan Carter's business was profitable. Ava nodded. Then everything started going wrong. Vincent shook his head. No. Someone started making things go wrong. He slid another document toward her. Ava stared at the numbers. Several large investments had been redirected through companies she had never heard of. The signatures looked legitimate. The paperwork appeared professional. Yet the pattern was obvious. Money had been intentionally moved into projects designed to fail. Who did this? She whispered. Vincent looked directly at her. Richard Hale. The name belonged to the businessman who had arrived earlier that day. Ava felt sick. Why? Vincent remained silent for several moments. Then he opened a folder she had never seen before. Inside was a photograph of her. Not the one from 6 months ago. This one was much older. Ava looked younger. She stood beside her father at a community fundraiser years earlier. Her breath caught. Why do you have this? Vincent's expression became serious. Because Richard Hale was never interested in your father. Ava stared at him. What does that mean? Vincent took a slow breath. The target was always you. The room seemed to stop moving. Ava looked back at the photograph. That makes no sense. It did not make sense to me either at first. Vincent opened another file. Inside were reports compiled over several years. You volunteered at shelters, community centers, food programs. You helped people connected to a charitable foundation. Ava frowned. So? Vincent tapped the name at the top of one report. The foundation belonged to his late mother. Suddenly the pieces began moving into place. Vincent continued speaking. My mother noticed you years ago. She spoke about you often. After she passed away, I continued supporting several of her projects. That is how I learned your name. Ava stared at him in disbelief. You knew me because of your mother? Vincent nodded. And because someone else knew your value too. Ava felt a chill run through her body. Richard Hale had not been targeting money. He had been targeting influence hidden inside charitable organizations connected to powerful families. Ethan Carter had simply been the easiest path. Vincent closed the file and looked at her steadily. The day I saw your father sitting across from me, I already knew the truth. Ava's heart raced. Then why did you say I would serve as payment? Vincent's eyes softened. Because it was the only way I could remove you from Richard Hale's reach before he realized I was protecting you. The truth changed everything, but it did not end the danger. If anything, it made the situation more complicated. Ava spent the next several days trying to process what Vincent had revealed. Every assumption she had carried into the Romano estate had been wrong. The debt had been manipulated. Her father had been used. Vincent had never intended to claim her as payment. Instead, he had removed her from a situation he believed was becoming dangerous. Yet one question remained unanswered. What exactly did Richard Hale want? The answer arrived sooner than anyone expected. 3 days later, Vincent invited Ava into a meeting taking place inside the mansion library. Several attorneys, financial investigators, and business consultants sat around a large table covered with documents. Ava immediately noticed Richard Hale standing near one of the windows. He looked calm, confident, and completely unconcerned. Vincent remained seated at the head of the table. We are here because certain records have finally been verified, he announced. One of the investigators activated a screen displaying years of financial transactions. Ava watched as names, dates, and company records appeared. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Dozens of struggling business owners had been pushed into similar situations. Their assets had been transferred. Their organizations had been absorbed. Their reputations had been damaged. Ethan Carter was only one of many victims. Richard listened without interruption. When the presentation ended, he slowly adjusted his tie and smiled. Business failures happen every day. Several people exchanged uncomfortable looks. The explanation sounded polished. Reasonable. Yet nobody in the room seemed convinced. Then another investigator stepped forward carrying a thin folder. There is one more issue. The room became silent. He opened the folder and revealed correspondence connected to charitable foundations supported by Vincent's mother. Ava immediately recognized several organizations where she had volunteered. The investigator continued speaking. Certain individuals attempted to gain influence over these programs by controlling people connected to them. Richard's smile finally faded. Ava felt her pulse quicken. For the first time, she saw uncertainty appear in his expression. The investigator displayed additional records. Several board members had been pressured to resign over the years. Funding decisions had been manipulated. Community projects had been quietly redirected. Everything pointed toward a long-term effort to gain control over respected charitable networks. Vincent remained calm throughout the presentation. He never raised his voice. He never interrupted. He simply allowed the facts to speak for themselves. Ava suddenly understood why he had seemed so confident. He was not relying on power. He was relying on evidence. When the meeting finally ended, Richard left the mansion without his usual confidence. Nobody celebrated. Nobody cheered. Instead, a quiet sense of justice settled over the room. Outside, the afternoon sun illuminated the estate gardens. Ava walked slowly toward the greenhouse, trying to absorb everything she had witnessed. A few minutes later, Vincent joined her. Neither spoke immediately. They stood among the flowers that had continued growing stronger each day. "You knew this would happen," Ava said softly. Vincent shook his head. "I hoped it would happen." Ava looked at him. "You could have ignored my family." "Yes. You could have protected your own interests." "Probably." Ava smiled faintly. "But you did not." Vincent looked across the greenhouse toward the bench where his mother used to sit. "My mother believed people reveal who they are when helping someone who cannot repay them." Ava followed his gaze. For the first time since arriving at the estate, she realized she was no longer afraid of him. And that realization frightened her in an entirely different way. Autumn arrived quietly at the Romano estate. The greenhouse no longer resembled the forgotten structure Ava had first entered weeks earlier. Flowers bloomed beneath the glass ceiling. Vines climbed restored trellises. Color had returned to corners once buried beneath dust and neglect. Visitors from several charitable organizations occasionally stopped by to admire the transformation, and each time they did, Ava felt a small sense of pride. Yet the greatest change had not happened inside the greenhouse. It had happened between her and Vincent. The walls that once existed between them continued disappearing one conversation at a time. One afternoon, Margaret handed Ava a letter that had arrived from her father. She immediately recognized Ethan's handwriting. Sitting on the old wooden bench inside the greenhouse, she carefully opened the envelope. Her eyes filled with tears before she even reached the second paragraph. The investigation had completely cleared his name. Former business partners who had avoided him for months were calling with apologies. Opportunities were beginning to return. For the first time in years, he sounded hopeful. Ava pressed the letter against her chest and closed her eyes. The weight she had been carrying for so long finally felt lighter. Later that evening she found Vincent walking through the estate gardens. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and amber. Without saying a word, she handed him the letter. He read it quietly. When he finished, he returned it with a small nod. "He deserves that peace." Ava smiled. "You helped give it to him." Vincent looked away toward the distant horizon. "The truth gave it to him." His answer did not surprise her. He never took credit for things he could easily claim. That was one of the qualities she had come to admire most. They continued walking together along a stone pathway lined with roses. For a while neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable now. Familiar. Then Vincent stopped beside a fountain and reached into his jacket pocket. Ava watched as he removed a folded piece of paper. "My mother wrote this a few months before she died," he said. He handed it to her. Ava unfolded the page carefully. The handwriting matched the journals she had discovered in the greenhouse. As she read, her eyes widened. The note spoke about kindness, second chances, and the importance of protecting good people in a difficult world. Near the bottom was a single sentence underlined twice. "One day, someone will enter your life and remind you that strength and kindness belong together." Ava read the line again. Then she looked up. Vincent was watching her. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The air felt different somehow. Softer. More vulnerable. Finally Ava smiled through tears. "She sounds like an extraordinary woman." Vincent's expression warmed. "She would have liked you." The words settled gently between them. For reasons she could not fully explain, they touched her more deeply than anything else he had ever said. As the last light of day disappeared beyond the gardens, Ava realized something important. She no longer saw the Romano estate as a place where she had been taken. She saw it as the place where her life had been returned to her. And standing beside Vincent beneath the fading autumn sky, she began wondering whether her future might be connected to his in ways neither of them had expected. 1 year later, the greenhouse had become the heart of the Romano estate. Visitors traveled from across the city to admire its beauty, but few understood what it truly represented. It was no longer a memorial to loss. It had become a symbol of renewal. Ava often stood beneath the glass ceiling in the early morning sunlight, remembering the frightened woman who had first unlocked its doors. That version of herself felt distant now. Her father had rebuilt his business with honesty and determination. The charitable programs connected to Vincent's mother were thriving again. Families who once struggled were receiving help. Opportunities that had nearly disappeared were returning to entire communities. The damage caused by greed had slowly been replaced by something stronger. Hope. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Vincent asked Ava to join him for a walk. The estate grounds glowed with shades of gold and amber. Leaves drifted gently across the pathways as they made their way toward a quiet hill overlooking the gardens. Ava noticed a small table waiting beneath an old oak tree. Resting on it was a framed photograph of Vincent's mother beside a vase filled with flowers from the greenhouse. For a moment neither spoke. They simply stood together in comfortable silence. Finally Vincent looked toward the photograph and smiled softly. She would have loved this view. Ava nodded. She would have loved what happened here. Vincent turned toward her. No. She would have loved who made it happen. Ava felt emotion rise in her chest. Before she could answer, Vincent reached into his coat pocket and removed a folded document. He handed it to her. Confused, she opened it. Her eyes widened. The document officially released every remaining obligation connected to the Carter debt. Every record. Every claim. Every legal connection. Gone. Ava looked up at him. This was already resolved. Vincent nodded. I know. Then why do this? His answer came quietly. Because some things deserve a final ending. Tears filled her eyes. For so long she had carried the weight of circumstances she never created. Now even the last shadow of that burden had disappeared. Vincent took a slow breath. There is something else. Ava's heart began to race. The expression on his face was unlike anything she had seen before. Not uncertainty. Not fear. Vulnerability. The kind that only appears when something truly matters. He reached into his pocket once more and revealed a small ring box. Ava froze. The world seemed to become perfectly still. Even the wind felt quieter. Vincent looked directly into her eyes. The day I brought you here, everyone believed I was taking something from you. His voice remained calm. The truth is that you gave something back to me. Ava could barely breathe. Vincent continued. You brought life back into a place I could not enter. You reminded me what my mother believed. You reminded me who I wanted to be. He opened the ring box. You were never payment. Tears rolled down Ava's cheeks. You were always the reason this story changed. For several seconds she could not speak. Then she smiled through her tears and nodded. Vincent's expression softened with relief and happiness. As the autumn sun settled across the estate and golden light filled the gardens below, the greenhouse, the family they had helped rebuild, and the future they would share all seemed connected by a single truth. Sometimes the greatest act of justice is giving someone back their dignity. And that day, Ava finally understood she had never been a debt to be paid. She had always been a person worthy of being chosen.